evening. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Linda Orsano. I represent the Northport East Northport Community Drug and Alcohol Task Force. We understand that the challenges facing our youth today, they're complex, and mental health is a major factor in the conversation. Suicide, as one of the most painful outcomes of untreated mental health struggles, is a critical part of that discussion. And together we can break silence, share our stories, and work towards a future where no one feels alone in their struggles. Suicide is a difficult topic, but it's one that we cannot shy away from. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how can we start a meaningful conversation about suicide prevention and mental health awareness in a school setting without overwhelming students? And tonight, we hope to find answers, share resources, and equip each other with the tools to make a real difference. Before we get started, I would like to introduce to you Anthony Ferrandino, who is the Drug and Alcohol Counselor here at Northport High School.
Thank you, Linda. Good evening, everybody. This night was created as a part of a week-long event at the high school, and now in many buildings in our district, called Wellness Week. Right, this is an opportunity. This whole week, we've been having speakers push into our health classes, into our PE classes. We are going to have a lot of interactive tables tomorrow, all for the purpose of immersing our students in educating them on mental health and mental wellness, coping skills, and the many facets surrounding wellness, in hopes to have them think about that, have them reach out and get help if they need help, or to, enhance their coping strategies, right? One of the biggest things that I think we see in the school is that kids struggle with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues, and they need coping skills. And in the counseling center, this is what we're providing. We're giving them these resources. We're connecting them with the community. So this week is this immersion of those skills, but it wouldn't really be complete without engaging a community, right? Because they go home every night, and it's important to provide our families and our parents and our caregivers with these same skills and tools, and at least have this conversation. Because as a parent myself, and I am a social worker, it's tough to have these conversations with my son. It's a really, tough thing when my son comes home and he doesn't look right, and how to approach him and say, how are you doing and what's happening? And, if he says something to me that's alarming, what am I doing with that information? So this is why this was so important for us to put together. And so how it's going to work tonight, we are so fortunate to have the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to present a PowerPoint to you, and then to be on our panel. And we're going to have this panel discussion where we hope that if you have questions, you can ask those questions, and that we can provide answers, or we could at least provide direction. I don't want to say I know everything or we know everything, but at least we do provide some direction or some link to a resource. And that's what we hope to do, right? Start the conversation. So it is my pleasure to introduce Katie Dietz, who is the program manager for American Foundation Suicide Prevention, and Chris Tafone, who is a board member and volunteer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They are going to present a more than said, this education, which is then hopefully going to spark us into a discussion. So without further ado, Katie and Chris.
Good evening, everyone. So like Anthony said, my name is Katie Dietz. I am Programs Manager for the Long Island chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We're really excited to be here tonight. Chris and I had the pleasure of spending yesterday here speaking with the students in health classes about the importance of mental health and what it looks like to maybe be struggling with your mental health and how to have a conversation about it. And so we're really grateful to be able to be here to talk to you guys tonight. so that you can go home and better support your children. Before we get started, we always like to preface our programs with talking about suicide can be a really difficult topic. So if at any point in time you feel like you need to step out, that is perfectly fine. Give us a thumbs up on your way out so we know you're all good and we don't need to follow you up, check in on you. But, we want you to protect your own mental health as you go through this presentation. We hope that you take something away from this that helps you to better support those in your life. Because what you're going to learn tonight is not only going to apply to your children, but also to the people that you are surrounded with every single day, your loved ones, your coworkers, the people you encounter throughout your life. So we're going to get started. And before we really dive into it, we got to go over some language because how we talk about suicide matters. The language is really important so that we don't continue to perpetuate the stigma around suicide or around mental health conditions. So when we talk about suicide, historically speaking, you often hear people use the terminology committed suicide. We're moving away from using that type of language. The reason for that is it can imply a level of judgment, have a negative connotation. When you hear the term committed, it's often associated with committing a crime. And we've learned through research and through family members who have lost loved ones that sometimes this language can feel very harmful to them. So instead, we just use the language died by suicide or death by suicide. We can use the language that the individual killed himself or herself. But for the most part, you'll hear us speak about it as died by suicide. When we're talking about suicide attempts, we don't want to refer to suicide attempts as failed or successful. Again, that implies a layer of judgment that we want to try to remove from this to help with the stigma around mental health and suicide. Additionally, when speaking about a suicide attempt, we don't like to, and when I say don't like, what I really mean by that is it's really not safe to talk in detail about graphic details about that suicide method. And so we encourage people who are sharing stories about suicide, about losing a loved one to suicide, to not get into detail about suicide methods. That sharing those details can actually, we learned from research, can actually lead to contagion. And so we discourage that. It's okay to talk about losing someone to suicide, but we don't want to get into those graphic details. So in terms of scope of the problem, in 2022, there were a total of 49,476 suicide deaths in the United States. That was such a suicide rate of 14.21, which means that 14 suicides are reported for every 100,000 people in the country. This makes suicide the 11th leading cause of death in the United States, and over half of all suicides that were reported were completed with a firearm. Among the ages between 10 and 24, the data we have related to this is from 2021, but there were 7,126 suicide deaths, representing almost 15% of all suicides in that year. This suicide rate here was 10.77 per 100,000 young people in the country, which makes it the third leading cause of death. It is also important to note that death by any cause is still very rare within this age group. And we want to stress the word reported when we're sharing these statistics because suicide has historically been underreported. There are many reasons for this, but sometimes the stigma surrounding suicide can make families hesitant to classify that death as a suicide. So this graph here shows suicide rates across the lifespan. I'm not sure if you can read the little numbers on the bottom here, but you start to see those numbers driving way up once we hit age 10. And so, before age 10, suicide is quite rare, but they start to increase more dramatically throughout adolescence and early adulthood than during any other stage of the life cycle. With that being said, suicide rates for adolescents and young adults are clearly significantly lower than for those people in midlife or elder age groups. So this slide here is showing the difference in suicide rates for males and females between the ages of 10 and 24. So the blue line is males, the yellow line is females. So you can see that there's a pretty similar level if you look over on the third line here, I know this is probably really small. It's 12 years old, they're pretty even. And then you start to see the difference come about. So by age 18, the boys' rate is 5 times higher than the girls' rate, which works out to 15 suicides per 100,000 boys versus 3 per 100,000 girls. And this difference remains throughout adolescence, peaking around age 22 when the male suicide rate is 6 times more than the female rate. So in trying to understand what the difference is between these genders, some of the things that we look at is that it does tend to be more culturally acceptable for girls to seek help. Gender differences in traits like aggression and impulsivity are thought to contribute to the higher rate of suicide in males across all ages. And boys tend to choose more lethal methods such as firearms. So if you're choosing a less lethal method, there's room for intervention. So obviously if there's less time and room for intervention, then that rate is going to be higher. But by just looking at deaths by suicide, we're missing the bigger picture. So we get information from the CDC regarding hospital admission data for non-fatal injuries. And for young people, this tells us that there are an estimated 100 to 200 suicide attempts that require medical attention for every reported death by suicide. I'm going to say that again just to slow it down a little bit. For every reported death, there's an additional 100 to 200 suicide attempts. Approximately 2.9% of youth in grades 9 through 12 reported making a suicide attempt that required treatment by a doctor or a nurse. We only have data for individuals who are admitted into medical hospitals for self-inflicted injuries, so this number is very conservative because there are a lot of suicide attempts that do not require admission or medical attention. Youth are more likely to survive suicide attempts compared to other age groups in general, and because they have healthier bodies, they live with others who can intervene and help rescue them, and they tend to have less access to lethal means. With that being said, attempts are opportunities to intervene and help people get healthy. So the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey looks at health risk behaviors that contribute to leading causes of death, disability, and social problems amongst youth and adults in the United States. This is done every 2 years during the spring semester to provide data representative of 9th through 12th grade students in public and private schools in the United States. According to the 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we learned that 22.2% of American high school students report that they have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. That's almost a quarter of high school students in America. 17.6% report having made a plan, and 10.2% report having made a suicide attempt in the prior year. When we hear a young person talk about wanting to take their life or indicate that they are thinking about suicide, we have to take it seriously every single time. Some may think that teens talk about suicide for attention, and it is important that we take all threats of suicide seriously until that teen is seen by a mental health provider. So focusing on mental health conditions is clearly essential, but it doesn't give us the full picture of the complexities of suicide risk. Risk factors are elements in a person's life that can increase their suicide risks. So we group these risk factors into 3 main categories: health factors, historical factors, and environmental factors. So health factors are going to be things like biological and psychological aspects of a person's health. So this can include the presence of a mental health condition. Historical factors are things that happened in that person's or family's past history. And environmental factors are going to be things like societal and cultural factors, access to lethal means, as well as individual life events. In general, risk factors are longer-term issues that can signal the need to be as proactive as possible when it comes to mental health. But the presence of risk factors does not indicate that an attempt is necessarily going to be made. So when we're talking about teens, it can be really easy to mistake mental health symptoms for other typical youth behaviors, such as formal adolescent mood swings, laziness, poor attitude, or immaturity. With that being said, these perceptions that adults have of teens might inhibit adolescents from seeking help, which is why it's super important for us to talk about mental illness and to take it very seriously and to take suicide very seriously. When you start to notice a change, it never hurts to have a conversation with your child about what you're seeing. And you might want to talk with their doctor as well about the changes that you're seeing. So we group these warning signs into 3 categories: talk, behavior, and mood. A lot of times we hear warning signs in what's being said. People who are struggling with their mental health and feeling suicidal often will talk about it. Sometimes it's subtly, sometimes it's direct. You want to listen for statements, things like, I should just kill myself. I've got no reason to live. Everyone will be better off without me. There's no way out of this, or I can't live like this anymore. I can't take this pain anymore. Sometimes people joke about being suicidal. Don't assume that it's just a joke. Take it seriously every time. A lot of times people will joke about it to feel out what kind of response they're going to get and to see if that person is going to take them seriously. So no matter how it's talked about, I'm always start that conversation. Second warning sign categories: behavior. A person's suicide risk is greater if behavior is new or has increased, especially if that behavior change is related to a painful life event, a loss, or a change. Some things to look for: increased use of alcohol or drugs. I'm looking online for suicide methods: acting recklessly, things like driving too fast, risky sexual behaviors, engaging more in substance use. They might start to withdraw from usual activities. They might not participate in their clubs or sports anymore, or hang out with their friends, isolating from family or friends, going silent on social media. Individuals in distress can develop insomnia or feel like they have to sleep a lot more, appearing almost to hibernate. A sudden change in either direction is something you want to take notice of. Saying goodbye, giving away prized possessions, this is also a behavior that we don't want to ignore, as well as increased aggression. Picking fights is another warning sign that's often missed. So if you have a team that's normally easygoing and peaceful, and then all of a sudden they start to become aggressive or violent, you want to pay attention to that and take notice of it. And then mood. So sometimes the best indication that somebody could be at risk for suicide is sudden change in their mood. You want to look out for things like depression, lethargy, anxiety, loss of interest, increased irritability, shame, humiliation, extreme embarrassment, agitation, or rage. These are all behaviors or moods that you would expect of somebody that's feeling hopeless or really struggling. You'll notice on the bottom of this grade here is sudden unexplained happiness. I always like to spend a little time talking about this one because almost every time I give a suicide prevention program, afterwards somebody comes up to me and talks to me about someone they knew in their life, whether that was a neighbor, a friend, a loved one, and they reference this particular mood. They talk about how, they usually weren't very friendly, or they didn't always seem to be super happy. And then all of a sudden, the last time they saw that person, they were really, really happy. And they didn't realize that might have been a warning sign. Sudden, unexplained, typical mood that you would expect of someone, but it's something to take notice of it in somebody who has previously been depressed. When we're seeing these warning signs, you want to start a conversation with somebody. I'm going to turn it over now to Chris. He's going to take over for the rest of the presentation and talk about mental health treatment and what the resources are.
Although treatment varies from person to person, from the condition you have or the severity level, teens who are showing signs of depression can show improvement within approximately 4 to 6 weeks from receiving psychotherapy or some sort of talk therapy. For others, what might work better is a combination of talk therapy and medication that can make a significant difference. Many teens benefit as well from when the family engages in the therapy process as well. Treatment can make all the difference in short or long-term symptoms reduction as well as overall health, and it can vary in terms of the length and nature for depression. For some episodes, you may recover in a short period of time, though episodes can reoccur, and treatment will be in response to the symptoms during each episode that they have. For others, depression may follow multiple episodes and will be addressed more like a chronic illness, such as diabetes, for a long-term period. In these instances, it's probably recommended that treatment continue to help. This is why it's very important for folks that have depressive symptoms to be evaluated by a trained professional so that the treatment can address the core issues that they're suffering from. So seeing a mental health professional can be a critical part of this treatment. You want to make sure that the child feels like can talk to the professional, that they connect with the person. And if it's not a good fit, you can try somebody else. Make sure that the health professional has the information about your child's behavior, especially the thoughts of suicide. And of course, be sure to report any unusual behaviors or any suicidal thoughts they may have or any substance abuse. If medication is started, be vigilant that there might be a change. If they're on existing medications, Check in with your child's bone to end time to make sure that any changes in behavior are noted and reported back to the professional where appropriate. It's also recommended to stay in contact with the school counselor as appropriate to keep them apprised of a progress. And most importantly, a lot of patience is needed with your child. So barriers for treatment, as we discussed earlier, although treatment is effective in most cases, these common barriers can get in the way, leading to only 1/3 of teens experiencing mental health crisis getting the help that they need. Sometimes their symptoms aren't recognized as signs in a possible health condition, and sometimes it's dismissed, even by the person experiencing. Fear of treatment may also keep folks from getting the help they need or struggling to reach out. An overall sense of despair or hopelessness, both symptoms of depression, can lead someone to not reach out for help. They may not believe that there's help, or they don't think it can apply to them. When help seeking is not seen as a sign of strength, those people will not reach out either. It's discouraged. So we want to change that narrative and create a culture within schools and within our society that makes reaching out for help socially acceptable. When help seeking is seen as weakness, then mental health conditions are misunderstood, they're mocked, they're demonized, sometimes even in the media, and then that people feel too embarrassed to go out and get the help they need. Teens generally need that adults won't understand, so they don't reach out. And teens often don't have the means or access to do it on their own. They will need help from their parents or guardians. They may not be able to afford treatment. That's another barrier. Or they may not have the means of transportation to even get to the treatment. So what can we do to keep our teens safe? There are many things that you can do to help reduce the risk of suicide. Making sure the child receives mental health care when needed. Depression and other mental health conditions can be managed well with a minimal effect on your child's life. Obviously, strong connections to family, friends, and community play a role. Maintaining a safe and supportive household where you feel comfortable reaching out for help. It's very important, obviously, is to limit access to lethal means. As you can see, one of the methods of suicide that's probably the most common in the U.S. is by firearms. So we limiting access or locking up, the access to firearms is important. Nurture problem solving and good communication skills. Treat disappointments as learning opportunities instead of to be, dwell upon and be disappointed about. And don't be afraid to ask your child about their mental health. Ask them how they feel in response to different events that are going on in their life. And how do they feel that model of expressing emotions? For example, you might say, I felt sad too about that. I felt sad when this happened. And, it really bothered me. And again, as I mentioned before, I can't say it enough. The access to lethal means 51% of the suicide completions occur via firearm. So if you could keep your house safe, either by locking them up or taking firearms out for a period of time during an intense emotional crisis that someone's experiencing, you create a safe environment for. And trust your gut. There are a lot of things to look for. So look for changes in words, behavior, mood, and trust your instincts. Here's a rule of thumb. If you're wondering if your child is depressed or overly anxious, that's a sure sign that you should start at least a conversation and let them know that you're concerned. If you notice something, do not wait for your child to reach out or for the school to contact you. Be proactive. And the same goes for you. If you're having suicidal thoughts, if you've reached out before and didn't get the response you were looking for, try again. The first time your child may not be receptive, so just keep trying. Here are a few things to remember when you're talking to your child. Take it seriously, obviously, and don't wait to act. As we said before, trust your instincts. Be calm and prepared to listen. Asking the direct question, have you ever felt so bad that you had thoughts of suicide? It won't put the idea in their head, contrary to what folks may think. You may also want to help them identify a professional that they can talk to. But what's important is that you reassure the child that you're going to get them help and don't wait to do. You may also want to talk to others who interact with your child, such as the teachers, their coaches, friends, either to see if they've noticed any changes in their behavior. And remember, a stressor can seem small, that small to you may not be small to your child. So it's important to validate their feelings about the current situation, even if you see it differently than they do. At this point, the most responsible action is to get them help from a trained professional who can assess your child and help you figure out the next steps. If your child is in a crisis, take it into an emergency room or mental health center. Don't leave them alone until after they've been assessed. But there are also resources available to help. If there's one thing you take away from today, as Katie just mentioned before, it is the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Just as easy as it is to dial 911 in the emergency, it is the same now across the country to dial 988 to speak to a professional counselor. You press 1 in Veterans, speak Spanish, and for those who don't want to talk, you can text as well in English. But this line is available 24/7, 365 days. You can add it to your phone. Even if you ever use it yourself, you may call it for a friend. It doesn't have to be for you. You can call it to discuss about somebody you're concerned about. Your child can call as well. And where you can help them call the lifeline, where you would get a trained counsel who will tell you what you should do in order to help the person in distress. And now the 988 line is geotagged, just like 911. So even if you're dialing from a phone where your area code may be California, if you're calling from here, they will route you to a local call center, which can provide you local resources. The crisis text line, you can also text 741, and that also goes to a trainees.
I'd like to invite the panelists to come up, please.
So I was already introduced by Linda, but I am the drug and alcohol counselor for the school district, and I'm a school social worker, and I've been in that role for the past 18 years for Northport High School, for the Northport School District, Northport School District, actually. So I do a lot of work at the high school, but I span and work a lot with the teams at all the other buildings in the district. And how we address mental health in Northport is really, it's on many levels, right? We do a lot of prevention efforts. And then as counselors, we'll do some early intervention or some targeted interventions. And then we have to do some crisis intervention from time to time and make referrals into the community. What that's actually called in the school system is the multi-tier system, structured system, which is a system of supports, which is just a framework about how we go about doing this business. So tier 1 is everybody gets that information, right? So Wellness Week is a tier 1. That's what we're in right now. Everybody that is in Northport at the high school is getting a presentation, getting information. So we like to spend a lot of time in the school district providing tier 1 services, right? Intervention services that are universal for everywhere. We partner with a lot of our community organizations to also provide those services and push into the school, as well as we offer them a lot of evidence-based programs, second step. So depending on what level you're at in school, between elementary, middle, and high school, we have different tier 1 systems, right? Even an assembly would be a tier 1, right? Something on bullying would be a tier 1 intervention. Once you move into tier 2, it's now targeting. You're targeting a group for whatever reason. I just sat in tier 2 intervention April 1st. We had a presentation just for our ENL students. And we brought in a speaker just to speak about issues surrounding maybe that they have. That's a tier 2 intervention, and we'll do things like that. I am a tier 2 intervention in school because I'll meet with students that are identified as substance users, or that they're experimenting with substances. Maybe they're suspended for it, or maybe their parent reached out. And so that's a specific group that I am now reaching out to meet with and provide counseling for, or at least information to. Right? And once we move into that tier 3 is that most intensive need within the school community. We have an alternative school, Port Academy, that really focuses in on at the high school level, working with students that are really struggling with mental health, where they need a supportive environment. And we have other crises counseling that'll happen, right? Northport has a very robust mental health staff that can really specialize and help work one-on-one. Each one of our buildings at the secondary level have social workers, counselors, and psychologists. At the elementary school, we have elementary counselors, school counselors, and psychologists. So we have a very, very robust team that I pride myself on when I talk to other districts. They don't have the types of system that we had built in, or somebody who specialized just on substance use. Because again, you saw that presentation. Many people presenting with mental health issues are now coping using substances, right? So this thing goes hand in hand. We do several assessments within the district to kind of take temperature, take gauge of how our students are doing. We have a belonging committee. We have a group of mental health staff, administrators, and teachers that meet district-wide and then within each building to really assess school culture, positive school culture that we target. I'm on the belonging committee and the high school. I recently just shadow a student to see what that student's experience was like going through classes, and we picked a student makeup. So that just to see what that student's experiencing and see if we can improve that experience, see if that's a good experience and how we can make, changes. We'll have walkthroughs through the building just to see, how the culture is, what it looks like, what it feels like, what changes we can make. That information comes back, we meet collectively, and then we make changes. That's a data-driven approach to how we develop program. And then twice a year, for the last 5 years, we do a survey called the Panorama Survey, which is we survey grades 3 through 12, and we follow up on these 5 levels. We'll talk about emotional regulation, dealing with positive feelings, supportive relationships, and through that survey, we get that information. And so I'll get that information as a social worker, and somebody might get flagged, and then I'll do a crisis session with them. I'll connect with them and say, hey, you came up, or a counselor will connect with them. And then in general, we look at that data and we say, all right, we need to work more on regulation. Like, how do we work on emotional regulation within our classroom? How do we integrate that practice? So that's some of the work that we're doing at Northport. When we have a major crisis in the building, right, or something like a suicide, we call for this. We have a crisis response team. We have our mental health staff and our administrators that will meet, and then we'll create a program specifically to say, how are we going to address this? It could just even be a natural disaster. When we're talking about what do we need to do, how do we need to alter our gang? It might be an assembly. It might just mean being on alert. It might mean calling certain kids up, doing a targeted group. So that is on an case-by-case basis.
As someone who's been through such a difficult time, how did you find the strength to seek help? And how can other students be encouraged to do the same?
So I think it's so important to start with, it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that it takes a lot of strength within the person, and the person has to be ready to receive that help, because it's hard to remember when you're in such a dark place that there's people around you who love you and care for you. So truly just staying strong and true to yourself and trying to break through that barrier of feeling so alone, even though it is a very hard task to do. Just remember that there is strength in reaching out, and being vulnerable is not a weakness, is actually strength. And to remember that you deserve the help that you rightfully should have, and don't be ashamed of it, because even though it is so stigmatized, it is something that everyone either goes through or knows someone that goes through it. So you're never alone, even though you may feel alone. And after you get that help that you need, so many doors and just opening their light for you, and you'll truly become better when you have the rightful help. Because when you're young and don't know what you're doing, life feels so finite, and it's so important to know that there's so much more future ahead of you than there is past behind you. So don't stay stuck in that turmoil, and reach out for the professional help, because the professionals know what they're doing and what you need.
Great. Thank you so much. What to Scott? How do you think schools can better integrate a mental health curriculum and education? What do you think that they can do that will resonate more with students?
And schools really do have a unique position to provide this education, and we could hear from what Anthony said, is there are so many ways to go about doing it. I think one of the best ways to do it is, to amplify the youth voice. So that's why sitting next to this, royalty is, inspiring, because having the youth in the community speak to the youth is really something that makes a big difference. Huge, it's just magnitudes. In addition, I think that, not only talking openly about how important mental health is, and that it is a part of the education that they do receive, making it a circumscribed component, letting them know that, education involves learning how to live and learning how to cope. And, now more than ever, we know that our young people need that. So, really, I think in, supporting a vulnerable, open culture and giving opportunities to express these things, and, also make sure that the families are educated. The fact that you are here, it means you care, and that really makes a difference. It means something to your kids as well. So those are a few of the thoughts. And as part of that, they're one of the programs that we've had, which you're really, really lucky to be part of also, is there is a mental health youth advocacy program that high school kids could be a part of. North Court Suits, I think they have definitely been involved in the past, and it's a way to generate change in the school as well, and go to Washington, D.C. and Albany to advocate and speak to lawmakers. And I think that's another thing, encouraging our youth to advocate and speak up, because that's who the lawmakers are listening to also. So that's another thing to nurture in a simple set.
Hey, hold on to the mic a minute. If a student does attempt suicide or loses a peer to suicide, what are the immediate steps that the school and community should take to ensure support and recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about, what we'll formally refer to as post-vention, when there's a tragic situation. And, I also reiterate something that people were saying here, which is that over 50% of schools in New York State have absolutely no plan or structure around, these kinds of events. So for your community, the fact that you have this you're leading the way a little bit. The important thing in a situation like that is to, I think, enhance the connection, right? Offer opportunities for us to come together and connect as a community. So much, has been lost in terms of connection and community. And, research has showed us that in, the aftermath of events like this, really enhancing connectedness is one of the most important things you can do. So belonging, connection, fellowship, all of those kinds of things are so important, to not only support people, but to avoid contagion as well, which, is a real phenomenon. So, I think those are some of the things I would say.
I agree. Thank you. Of course. Anthony, what coping strategies do you teach students to deal with stress and anxiety and depression? And then how can these strategies help prevent thoughts of suicide?
So, in the work that I do, it's funny, tomorrow I'm doing a presentation to our IB diploma students about this topic, because they're going to be entering into a testing phase. And so their levels of stress are very high. So, teaching them how to turn that brain off or take a break, the mental break, is a tough task for these students, for any student, but for these students in particular. But some of the coping strategies that I'll teach is just that. Sometimes you got to take a pause, right? Step away. So that's a basic one that we'll share with everybody. Take a breath, use some grounding techniques, right? So the most common one we all show is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Or somebody's feeling very stressed. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel, and then, down the line until they can ground themselves, bring themselves back to the room. And then breathing is very important, just as simple as You count a 4-count breath in, you count breath out just to slow the heart rate down when you're anxious, or box breathing, right? Breathing for 4 seconds and then pausing and then releasing that breath for 4 seconds, then pausing and then again. Just teaching them how to regulate their breath, right? To slow things down so then they could do the work cognitively, right? So when you're in a situation that's high stress, you start going into fight or flight mode, right? Or if you have a lot of anxiety, I always tell the kids, all roads lead to death, because that's the only thing you're going to think about is, oh my God, this is going to happen and then I'm going to die. So we have to slow that down a bunch. So teaching those coping strategies and many, and then the rest of it's like you throw at the wall a lot of stuff and you see what sticks, because everybody's different, right? I listen to music, I go for walks, I be mindful, I have a mindfulness app. So you have to show all of those things for them to find one or two things. So people like to journal. We just did a coping skills group. Actually, our peers just led a coping skills group Tuesday, our One Light students. And they showed a couple of different breathing techniques, journaling, and they did it in a very fun way. Actually, it was a lot of fun. And the second part of your question is how was that impact, or how can that impact or reduce suicidal ideation? I feel like we said. So the idea of word coping is developing resiliency, right? So we know that, moods could change, moods could fluctuate. We could go into an upward mood and a downward mood, and it's how I manage it here. And I try and reduce that dip, because when we get to that ideation phase, that dip's going really low. So we want to kind of raise the floor a little bit. So, we contributed that. And again, in schools, we do school-based support counseling. So we'll end there. If somebody really, really has some chronic mental health issues, we want to partner with a professional, right? That's why we partnered with Northwell. That's why we have community partnerships. It's so important that we work together, work with the family. This is not an issue that the school can fix, that the family, we have to work on it together. So if it's very chronic, or if it's something that's just not a passage stress, we're going to need a team approach on that. A lot of referral, a lot of communication with outside organizations. We're actually going to have a community resource fair tomorrow. I think we have over 25 tables between students and community resources that will be in the commons, so students could be exposed to, and faculty be exposed to, some of their community partners.
Thank you, Anthony. Katie and Chris, how can teachers and other school staff be trained to recognize the signs of suicide risk and provide initial supports to students in crisis? And also, just the other part of that is, what role do peers play in suicidal prevention, and how can students be encouraged to support each other when they notice warning signs in a friend?
So I think the most important layer to whether it's teachers or peers supporting their students or their friends is the education layer to it. And, we are so grateful that you've joined us here tonight for this presentation. And we were able to do a very similar presentation, although a little bit more focused on mental health, a little less heavily focused on suicide, but still getting across those warning signs and those risk factors to the students. So, here at AFSP, we have a lot of different programming. We do a version of this presentation for faculty and staff as well. But it's really about making sure that the people that our children are surrounded by understand what those warning signs are. And once you start to realize what they are, you can know what to do next and learn how to have that conversation, which isn't always an easy thing to do. We talk a lot in our presentations about how it's so simple for us to stand up here and say, have a conversation, ask someone how they're doing. And when we talked to your students yesterday, Chris and I, we acknowledged to them, that may not be easy, and it can feel really awkward, whether it's a kid-to-kid, peer-to-peer, or parent-to-child, teacher to student. It can feel really awkward to open up and be vulnerable. And one of the ad campaigns that we partner with the Gen Foundation with is called Seize the Awkward, and we played several videos for the students yesterday that really just highlight how it can be really awkward, and really leaning into that awkwardness and just seizing the awkward to use that as an opportunity to have a conversation. But, at the end of the day, what's really the most important thing is that people really start to understand what these warning signs are. We need to just provide this education and by Anthony bringing us in here today, bringing us in yesterday. We're going to be joining at the Community Resource Fair tomorrow for the students as well. It's getting that education out there and making sure that students, parents, teachers, everyone understands what's out there. When we were presenting earlier, I highlighted on that sudden unexplained happiness piece, and how every time I give any presentation, someone comes up to me and talks about it, and they always follow it up with, I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that that was a warning sign. And so it's trying to eliminate that I wish I knew by just helping people know.
Sure. The one thing I'll say about we were asking about the peer-to-peer and the students themselves, the younger generation is much more comfortable talking about their mental health than my generation. Even older, we didn't talk about it. It was, if you did, it was whisper. I find with my own children and they are very forthcoming. So we think that maybe they can't handle this or that they don't want to talk about it, but they actually are much better at it than we are. So part of that education is not only at the youth level, but also at the adult level to get past that awkwardness and be able to communicate. But you'd be surprised how the younger generation is already I would say leap years ahead of us in being comfortable and focusing on their mental health and what does that mean, and having these conversations. So shouldn't be afraid to approach that, and you can learn a lot. And they do talk amongst themselves, as I'm sure as your parents know, and they know a lot more about their peers than you would think. So it's very important to have those conversations, because you will not only find out about them, but you'll also find out about their peers.
Hey, Chris, I just want to, I love the peer conversation. So this is like one of my missions in working in North Court is teaching young people how to do peer-to-peer, mentoring and peer-to-peer help, because they are with their peers. Like, that's who they see. And so I have the fortunate ability, I'm able to work with the SHARE program here as an advisor, which we teach students every year how to connect to their peers, and as they have an issue that's very serious, how to bring it to an adult. And I call that a won't pass off. And I can't tell you how many students bring students to my office as our first line. And so these are things we've tried many different types of peer mentoring programs in the last couple of years and trying to get them to sustain, as well as now I'm trying to work with student athletes and having that culture built in there, because it's very different animal with a student athlete and just kind of those mental health pressures of the field. So it is super, super important, and there's a lot of work to be done on that front. I see that as a tall task that I'm trying to kind of push it along in the district, because I do think that that's where it's at. We could have as many mental health staff, and they won't step foot in the counseling center. But you can get a kid to bring a kid to my office in a second.
That's really, thank you. I have a ton of questions, but I wanted to know, does anybody in the audience have questions for our panelists?
That came about quite a while ago, of this whole concept of your story isn't over. You don't use a period at the end of it. You're using a semicolon because your story is not over yet. And so the semicolons are representative of mental health awareness, and many people get that. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of people who get them tattooed in some form or another. A lot of it, they're like the body of a butterfly, things like that. And so it's really meant to tap into that idea that your story isn't over, and that mental health awareness piece.
Yes. Also, they were saying part of that is that you have the choice. You could stop the sentence when you have something. You could stop the sentence, but you choose not to. You continue. So, as Katie said, that's the thought behind that is such a powerful statement in just one thing of punctuation or grammar, if you will.
The autism spectrum provides, it's unique challenges, right? depending on where somebody sort of falls on that spectrum, their experience of life and their experience of just the world around them varies. So, when it comes to, suicide arising in the population, there are, many, many psychiatric conditions that people, who are on the autism spectrum experience. They may, experience and exhibit signs in a slightly different way than, somebody else. But I would say that, approaching it would be really very much the same. And if you are concerned, or if you see any of the warning signs, or anything that's signaling concern, that you ask the question. And it, as everybody stated, it starts with really asking and listen, right? Being there to listen, not to take over, and like, I'm a wordy person, and I really I'm quiet a lot in these kind of conversations, because you want to give people the opportunity. So, it's not all that different, but it is definitely something that does arise in the population. And it's a complex situation, and it's really case by case, I would say. But I think everything we said today applies.
Thanks. Kristen, when you were struggling, did you feel there was a stigma around talking about your mental health? And if so, how did you overcome that? And what advice would you give to others?
So I definitely felt like there was a stigma around it. I feel with, like they mentioned before, older generations had that stigma, and those generations are our parents and everything. So it wasn't really spoken about in my house, but I also tried to hide it from my family members just because I didn't want to put that burden on them. I feel like a lot of times that's part of why it's hidden. And to overcome that, I feel community is so important. That's why speaking up about these things, having these resources available, and getting this information to other generations that are raising us is so important. I unfortunately, actually, a couple years after my attempt, lost one of my friends to suicide while I was in high school, and unfortunately was very shunned in my school, and they didn't want to speak about it because they felt it would be glorifying it. And that just shows I graduated in 2020. It happened in 2017. So recently, even still, the stigma is still around, but it is so important to shine a light on these topics and know that not speaking about it will make it go away. So just find your community, whether that be through organizations or school, a trusted adult, the social workers. There's someone out there for you who cares about you and wants you to thrive, and you just need to be able to find that strength to just reach out for that help and find that community, because you're never alone in these fights and people want to rise with you.
Thank you. In addition, what did the recovery process look like for you after experiencing the emotional struggles or loss? And also, what helped you most during that time?
So I'm very fortunate to have a good support system at home. I'm here today because my dad found me, and my mother helped me when she came into the picture as well with this struggle that I went through because she wasn't home at the time. So after this happened, they didn't know prior to me having my attempt that I was struggling with this. So they truly kicked it into high gear, and they got me the help I needed. And without that help, I wouldn't be here today. So that's why it's so important to put an emphasis on reaching out for that professional help, because they know what they're doing and they know what you need. And they will work with you hand in hand to get you the help you need. And whether that's medication, therapy, anything, it is so important to not be ashamed of what you're going through and to be outspoken and know that there are people who love you, whether that be your family or friends or anyone, because not everyone has that support system at home. It's so important to just encourage kids and remind them that they are needed here and they have a purpose. You woke up today, so you have a reason to be here. And it's so important to just put that light and that value into light, because it's hard when you're in such a dark place to see that you have a bright future ahead of you. So to just remind these kids, have these resources for these parents is so invaluable.
Thank you so much. Dr. Scott, how can psychiatrists help in reducing the stigma around seeking help for mental health challenges, especially in a high school setup?
So I think, a part of, being visible, being out there. I think also, really educating people and educating communities on, what our approach is as child and adolescent psychiatrists, mental health professionals in general, but psychiatrists specifically. We are not, medication prescribers by definition. I really take pride in a lot of ways in the statistic that 92% of the people that we see do not get medication prescribed. It is a multifactorial, symphony of things that have to come together for wellness to be maintained, right? So, and medication can have its place, but I think that psychiatrists also, need to really shine the light on with the fact that there are so many other ways to help. It's so many other ways to get through, and really find the right support, find the path forward. So I think those are some. And the other thing would be advocacy. And I would say to even all of you here, knowing as important as it is that you're here, communicate to your lawmakers, let them know how important this is, let them know that, this is a priority for your community. We really need that push also at the government level.
Thank you.
And I would say they had made mention in their presentation to lock up medications, and they were talking specifically like if somebody's depressed, and I'm thinking in my substance use mind is lock up medications and the end, right? Have everything lock up and the end. That's just a practice that you want to have in your house, whether it's because your child has some mental health issues or because you don't want them experimenting. And the same thing with your alcohol. So they had mentioned it actually in their PowerPoint. And I was just thinking my substitute brain went off and I was like, the end. That's it. You just lock them up.
Yeah, can I own it? I'm glad you said that, Emily. When it comes to teenagers, we know that their brains are not fully developed and impulsivity is common. And so when we're talking about locking up liquor, we're talking about locking up medications. He's right. The end. Doesn't matter if they're struggling with the mental health at all. And we also need to not just talk about locking up prescription medications. Prior to working in this role, I used to work at a children's hospital on an inpatient unit, pediatric inpatient unit. And I could tell you that every single day that I was at work, we had at least one child, adolescent, who was admitted post-suicide attempts. And not all of them got admitted. A lot of that would come through the emergency room, and they would stay in the emergency room until a bed opened up at the psychiatric hospital. Or some of them would be sent home following attempts. And so, and the majority of those attempts were Tylenol ingestions. We often let our kids take Tylenol on their own when they have baker pain or a headache. Maybe they're inactive and they're struggling with an injury. But Tylenol, something that seems like the most innocent medication in our cabinet, is also one of the most commonly used medications in suicide attempts. And really, when we're talking about locking these things up, it's not about good kids or bad kids. It's about putting a barrier of protection between underdeveloped minds who have a tendency towards impulsivity, just like you would put a seatbelt on in a car. And so it's really, I think a lot of parents feel like, oh, well, if I lock my liquor cabinet, like I don't have to do that because I don't have bad kids. Or, same thing with medication. It's not about good kids, bad kids. It's really about providing that protection between an underdeveloped brain and their impulsivity. And there's nothing to be ashamed of about that and nothing wrong with that. You're doing something. You're just adding additional layers of safety to your child's health.
Great. So one of the things that we do ask at the Drug and Alcohol Task Force is, what's in your medicine cabinet, and are you hiding and putting your alcohol above where people cannot get to it? The other thing we're looking into are lock bags. These lock bags are really great, and they have little combinations upon them, and we're looking to give them out to parents to help them with that as well. But it is important because of what you're sharing.
Absolutely. And we can help connect, we can help let you know what those resources are that are out there in the community. NAMI has a lot of great support groups, and Kristen actually probably speak a little bit more about that. She used to be on the board of NAMI. But there's a lot of support groups out there for teens who have struggled with suicidal ideation, maybe have survived an attempt. There are support groups out there for parents supporting teens who are struggling with their mental health. And so there absolutely are groups out there that meet in person, that meet virtually. They certainly exist. And if you're interested in finding those, we can absolutely connect you to those groups. Kristen, do you want to speak a little bit about what NAMI does offer?
Yeah. So if you actually look up our NAMI website, we do have virtual meetings every week for different groups, whether that be peer-to-peer, family-to-family, spouse, like anything you can think of for a group, there's a Zoom for it. So weekly and monthly, there are different Zooms on the NAMI website for people who need support, and they're very active. They're all closed and confidential, so you can speak your mind and be free to talk about whatever you want. And there's just so many resources out there, and they're all Google click away. And that's the good thing about technology now, is that you can do it in your room, in your living room, and have that resource available to you wherever you meet. And I'm also a peer-to-peer certified presenter, so I've worked in these groups as well to see what it's like. And the conversation just goes so well, and you are with people who are going through similar things as you, so it's giving you that sense of community as well.
And that peer-to-peer role is really being developed right now in the field, whether it's substance use or mental health, and having people with lived experience and training to go along and work with social workers, whether it's in the hospital, or they do a crisis intervention team to your house, or they're offering that support services at this point in time, which my wife is involved with DASH, which are, very similar, and they have peers that work, and we'll actually have them here tomorrow in the Commons for a resource, just so people can kind of connect to peers and just see the difference. And, because that's obviously that piece, like somebody with lived experience that also has some training. They're not quite a professional counselor, and they'll talk to you about the issues, but they'll provide that support, and they have that information. It's sometimes more powerful, and that's the only place that somebody will speak to at that point in time is start where you're at.
Thank you. Dr. Scott, from a mental health professional perspective, what are some effective ways to provide ongoing care to students who may have attempted suicide, and how do you ensure that they feel supported rather than stigmatized?
So, from the mental health professional standpoint, I think that, there's a lot of importance in a couple of things. One thing is ongoing safety planning, which is, could be a very broad topic. But, really what it is helping people who, are vulnerable or who have had past attempts to, really have a structure and a stepwise approach to, not only understanding what the triggers are, so, helping people get ahead of their own triggers, but also identifying, a clear plan of, what can I do if I start to do, recognize some of those, early triggering thoughts, emotions, images. What can I do to distract myself? What coping skills can I use in the moment myself? If that doesn't work, who can I go to for distraction? Because we do know that, distraction, occupying your attention with other things does help. Even just like delay the amount of time sitting with a suicidal thought and allowing it to pass, allowing your nervous system to kind of work through that surge is important. And that, really having a clear plan for who that person will reach out to for help, professional or, personal alike. So definitely that is one of the main, foundational pieces. Making sure that people also have access to those resources. So, I will tell, any child that I'm talking to about suicide, let's take out that cell phone. I know you got one. Let's put 988 in there. Right? No, there are other wonderful resources. The Trevor Project is a wonderful resource for the LGBTQ plus population, but really don't will support anyone. But having it really well defined in advance and practicing, really what they're going to do before a crisis comes. Because as a few of us have said, in crisis, we just, the thinking part of our brain goes offline, and we're not able to do that logical thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Adding something, and it's kind of another layer to the presentation. I Austin will share a couple of stories to highlight the emphasis of language. It's a really hard thing to ask somebody that you care about, are you thinking about suicide? Because you're terrified of what the answer is going to be. My colleague who lost her daughter at 15 years old to suicide, and she has 2 other children. The first thing she saw our Talk Saves Lives presentation, which is our general suicide prevention education program, she said to me, I've never asked my other children that question, and they both struggle with their mental health. And I realize now that the reason I've never asked it is because I'm scared. I'm scared that they're going to say yes. And I think it's really important that we talk about how scary that is so that we can overcome that fear. I had to ask this question to somebody in my life that I care deeply about. I do this work for a living. I sat there for 20 minutes having a conversation with this person in my head saying, you should ask the question. You need to ask the question. You've seen these red flags. You have to ask the question. And it took me 20 minutes to get the courage to say the words, have you thought about suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? Thankfully, in that situation, the answer was no, but the answer was yes. I am equipped with the resources to be able to help that person, and now you are too. But it's worth acknowledging that it's absolutely terrifying to ask. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask it, because if the end result of not asking that question and the answer actually being yes is so much worse than the answer being yes and you being able to intervene. Additionally, in terms of language, I share, it is not my story, but I like to share an anecdotal story of a friend of mine, or a colleague of mine who does this work. He's a police officer in Suffolk County, and he's very involved in the suicide prevention space. And he shares this story when he does his training is about how early on in his career, he was called to a crisis situation with a teenage girl. And when he first got there, they were talking, and he said to her, are you thinking of hurting yourself? And she said no. And they carried on their conversation. And as he got down the line, he then asked her, are you thinking of killing yourself? And she said yes. And he said, earlier on, I asked you if you were thinking of hurting yourself. And he said no. But now you're telling you're thinking of killing yourself. Why did she say no before? And she said, oh, I'm not a cutter. I don't cut. So to her, hurting herself and killing herself were 2 entirely different things. And I like to share that story because I think it really drives home the importance of using this very specific language and not being afraid to ask directly about suicide. We know that it is important. We know that it is not going to plant the idea in their head. If I, looked at you right now and said, are you planning to run and jump off of this stage here, and you weren't previously thinking about doing it, probably not going to go do it now. It's kind of the same thing. So, just really driving home, you take something away from this, it's really the importance of asking that question very specifically and very directly, as absolutely scary and terrifying as that is.
Thank you. Anthony, and I just have 2 more and I'll stop. How do you approach having conversations with students who might not initially be open about their struggles?
And I know that they are struggling. So I gave an example before. So, I have a lot of students that will bring other students to my office. So I guess this is the closest way to go. The students saying, like, I know my friend is struggling with ideation. They told me, they don't want to come and talk. They don't want to come to your office. So what I do is I say, well, just bring them with you and we'll talk. And so we just kind of ease them into the room, because sometimes it's scary to think I'm going to go into this guy's office and he's going to pull out this clipboard and start asking me all of these questions. So a lot of times we have to warm the stakes a bit and then get them comfortable. And then you have to come to a point where you have to talk about those questions and you have to ask those questions. And you can do that in a very compassionate and empathetic way, in a very caring way. And I think that's the key. I tend to use humor a lot. That's my style, and it works very well for me. And I'm able to kind of use humor, but still be serious. I don't know how else to put that, and kind of break the tension in the conversation. And, you know, I think that letting that student know that they'll be okay, like they're going to be okay. I'm going to take care of you. I'm not going to, you know, whatever your fear, what is fear in talking to me about this? Is it that I'm going to call home right away and then your parents are going to yell at you? Like, I'm going to help you with navigate that conversation. We're going to come up with a plan. We have a really good system here.
And if you can share just something that people can take away with them tonight to remember, what would that be?
I would say that even though this is a hard topic, it's necessary. This is not something to shy away from. As was mentioned before, speaking about it won't make someone think or want to do it. It'll just open the conversation and allow them that safe space to be open with you about how they're truly feeling. And you'll never know how much you can transform someone's life with a simple conversation. And even though it's hard, to do it anyway.
Be here. Backstop.
Sure. I find that I repeatedly come back to the idea of, just how important it is to establish community around you and to be a part of that for other people. We are human beings. We are all trying to do the same thing, avoid pain, experience joys, just by being, your authentic self, and by, again, just being a part of a welcoming community to other people. It's just such an important thing. We need so much more of it out there. And you guys are all taking those steps. You're here. So thank you for, being on that road already. And I'll just say again, ask the question. Like everybody says, ask the question. It's so important. And just opening the doors ever.
Thank you.
Dr. Scott stole my "It Takes a Village." It Takes a Village. And we should all be villagers together. But, also adolescence is tough, man. There's a lot. These kids are going through a lot. And, let's figure out ways to support them and help them be successful and build resilience. I think that's so important. That word resilience gets thrown around a lot, and it really needs to be fostered and developed. And so we all play a part in that process by working together. It's so important. And, when they're saying they're having a tough time, don't judge. They're having a tough time. I don't care if it's a fight with a friend or that's their world. So we have to acknowledge their world is real. My world is, am I going to pay the bills? And their world is their friends ignoring them on Instagram, or their friends not leaving them unread. And that's traumatic.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, we're living in crazy times that seem to be getting crazier by the day. And, we just imagine what our children are experiencing, and the fact that they have devices in their hands that they can access information that would take us, days, or we'd never get to it. So they're inundated on so many different levels with information, things beyond their scope, or just so many things go on. So it really is important for them to take the time to have those. It sounds old fashioned, but just have that time where you can put the phone away and be part of your family and just be present, because their mind is on overload all day between school, between social media, between what's going on in the world. So it's so important more than ever now to have that time to get outside, just leave your phones and go take a hike, be together with your family, be together with your friends, and find that space, because that space has disappeared to a large extent, and we have to reclaim it a little, because that that is such a big part of helping your mental health and making you feel better and able to survive in this world that is this topsy-turvy situation that we find ourselves.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm going to leave you all with an assignment. I'm so grateful you are all here. So thank you for showing up today for your children. And I want you to go home and I want you to talk to them and say, I went to a presentation tonight about suicide prevention. What do you think about that? Use this as an opportunity to start the conversation and start those vulnerable, open up those vulnerable conversations and allow them to let you know what they think about it and let you know what they learned about it. And I will end it on a positive note with the saying and on our stickers on the back table. Please stop by and grab some of that. The world is better with you in it, and you are not alone. We want you to know that, and we want your children to know that. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. So thank you all again for coming. The panelists will be around if you have any questions. Have a great night.